Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Private Property Farming podcast this afternoon. Today, I'm joined by a woman farmer. I'm so glad that I get to speak to another female farmer in the industry. But our topic today is really around hydroponic farming, and the guest is an experienced individual in hydroponic farming because she is a hydroponic farmer herself. And so, just note that our conversation is not closed off. Feel free to comment, like, share this live as well with anybody who you feel that might be interested in our topic today. We are live on Facebook, YouTube, as well as Instagram. So please ask any questions that you may have to myself or to the guest. And but yeah, without further ado, I just want to introduce you to Sibongile Cele, who is a hydroponic farmer based in Johannesburg, and she is the founder and CEO of Mcebo Group. Sibongile, how are you doing?
I'm great, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be part of sharing today of how farming it can be done differently, and I'm really excited.
Wow, I'm excited too, because, you know, we hear these fancy terms, hydroponic farms, water saving, farming without soil, and I think you're the best person to give us that breakdown. But before we go into it, who is Sibongile? Tell us a bit about Mcebo Group as well, and how did you get into farming?
Well, it's actually amazing that the interest and passion started when we were growing up. My dad to communicate, to say, please be part of doing the food gardens. And we were taught how to do it. And I really enjoyed the touching of the soil, not knowing that earlier when we were being taught this, it was a seed that was being planted. Then when I finished my studies, I still continued because I'm an accountant by profession. I did my articles at Deloitte. Then as I got older and I said, let me follow my passion, and looking at a situation where there's food shortage. And I said, no, let me go and study more on agriculture. Then that's when we did the hydroponics training through the initiative that was in the city called UAI, which is urban initiative, where they were introducing people to say, can you farm, looking at that space that's available on rooftops. So that's when I went and did the training.
Okay, awesome. So from accountant to farmer. And how long was the training, if I may ask?
The training was for 3 months. We did training for 3 months. Then we also did experimental training for 3 months.
Okay, so now after the training, what then happened?
Then we did pitch sessions where we pitched to the SA brewery, and one of the ladies that was part of the members that came from SA brewery, they were willing to help with the setting up of the hydroponics farm. So we got assistance from SA brewery to set up a farm, which we set up in Hillbrow at the rooftop of a crèche, which my son went to that crèche.
Oh, wow. Wow.
At the Outreach Foundation, yes. So the setup was done on top of the crèche that my son went to.
Okay, so tell us about this your company or the farm, the hydroponic farm. So it's set in, yeah.
It's set in Hillbrow at the Outreach Foundation, and my entity, I run it as a social enterprise. So part of the produce that we producing, we actually sharing with the children at the crèche, and then we're also doing a home in the south of Johannesburg called TLC, where we give them vegetables. Because some of the produce that we have in excess, we donate a percentage to the home and the crèche to encourage people to eat fresh vegetables.
Okay, so when did you start your farming journey, specifically on this rooftop farming, and how big in terms of square meters is the rooftop farm?
Okay, we started in 2017, and the rooftop is set up on 300 square meters, which is 3 tunnels that take about 6 units. And these units, they're vertically set, so they take about 600 crops on 1 unit. So you're looking at 3,600 crops at a go on a monthly basis.
Okay, so what type of crops can one farm hydroponically, especially in these systems that you are mentioning?
You can do your leafy greens, because my one that I'm doing, it's herbs and leafy greens and your edible flowers. But if you need to grow vegetables that've got bulb, you just get buckets that you can use to save water and still maximize space, because we're saving on water and on space.
Mm. So I'm curious, why didn't you just start farming like everybody else, just finding a piece of land, farming in the soil, renting the farm or buying the farm and just going from there? Why did you choose specifically hydroponic farming?
We saw hydroponic farming for the youth more, especially because most youth, they don't want to do the traditional way of farming. And then when we saw this, we said it's an opportunity to actually bring in the youth and see that you can do smart farming and look at also the climate change, because the situation that we're facing now, it's that there's challenges with water, there's challenges with heat, there's challenges with the energy that we're using. So on a large scale, but I still have the passion to farm on a larger farm. We've applied currently with the farms that have been made available by the rural development. So we just crossing fingers that if we can get that, then we can do a bigger scale on a farm and still do hydroponics on a large scale.
I see. So maybe explain to us the method in which you're farming hydroponically. I know I'm a farmer as well, so I know that there's ways where you can farm hydroponically using black growing bags and putting like cocoa peat or sawdust. But I know your method is slightly different. So you're farming on the white PVC pipes, is that correct?
Yes, and then we're using cups that we put the growing media inside the cups, it's small cups, and then they are planted on the PVC. Then the water circulates around the PVC. So the roots are always getting the water, and they help with the growth of the plant. And the cocoa peat that we use is the one that holds like soil for the plant to balance it. And also it's high in calcium. It also helps with that.
Yeah. So even with my method of farming, which is completely different to yours, my source of water is a borehole. Now, for people who are thinking rooftop farming, farming on top of a roof, where does one get the water from?
The setup, the way it's done, there's pipes that are taken, and it's municipal water that we're using. Then the water is taken from the tap, then it's connected to your pumps. And then there's containers, like your big gym containers that circulate the water. So you're able to measure the amount of water because it's metered, and you're able to check if you're using too much water or less water. So we're still using municipal water, but it's channeled through a meterage that meters the water into your system on the rooftop to maximize the space as well.
Okay, so I know even again with the method of hydroponic farming, it's constantly recirculating the water, so you're cleaning it, you're using it in your plants, etc. Is it wrong to assume that if you're using municipal water also, you might be paying high costs for that, as opposed to getting water from the borehole underground?
It's so true. That's why with the tanks, it helps because you're able to control that you use minimum water, because the pumps pump the same water rotating. So you don't have to be worrying about putting more water, like when you're using a hose, where you're just watering on the land and you don't measure how much water is gone out. So you able to trace the water and to minimize on the water usage.
Okay, so I know with farming every single year, input costs increase, So for a person who's watching this video and is also thinking about hydroponic farming, what type of costs from a setup point of view are we looking at? You said you mentioned about, you've got about 3 tunnels in a 300 square meters. On average, if one wants to start, just as a start, what type of costs would one be looking at, and what are the things that will contribute towards those costs?
The startup costs are quite high, and that's why most of the people will actually say it's not easy to just start unless you've raised capital or you've raised sponsorship. So the startup capitals, because it's your tunnels that you need to set up, it's the pumps that you need to have, It's the whole system, the NFT system that we use with the PVC that needs to be built up and set up. So the initial starting cost, usually it's usually what delays most of the farmers to say, if I have to do hydroponics, my startup cost, it's more expensive. But once you've got the system, then you are able to reduce the cost because your input cost is not that high because you're using your cocoa peats, that's the expense you have, and the seedlings that you have, and then you just have to make sure that you're paying your water bill.
Okay, so going from an academic point of view or having to do your research, would you advise a potential hydroponic farmer to start doing a course like you did with hydroponic farming, or they can just seek the advice of an expert and start setting it up? Which ways would you recommend for a person who wants to do a similar setup like yours?
I think that training is still key because you need to know how to operate the system and also what crops you're dealing with and also how to maintain the whole system and how to grow your crops. So the training is key as part of knowledge. But if you struggling to get into training, we always advise people to say, go to an existing person that's operating a farm and give him time, because as you work, you learn. So that's how most of the trainings we do for students to say, you've got your degree, but you don't have the practical. You can come in, do the practical side, then you're able to say you can go and start up in your community, because we're encouraging people to say, can we change communities one day at a time? The issue of hunger should be addressed on a serious note.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Sibongile, now I just want to go into the challenges that you're experiencing or have experienced in the past with regards to hydroponic farming. You're farming in the city, you know, there's this whole talk about climate change, air pollution, and you're in the city. I mean, you mentioned you're in Hillbrow, so, and I can imagine the amount of cars that travel in and out of the city. So what are the challenges that you have experienced being a hydroponic farmer on the rooftop in the middle of a very crowded and busy city when you really need good, clean air for your plants to grow?
And you actually raising it at the time when we also have a challenge with heat waves, because it gets very hot in the tunnels because of the heat wave. We're experiencing heat wave. And then also, like you said, most of the cars with the traffic in the inner city, that whole carbon emission is just too much for the plants. So it means you must have a tunnel that is well ventilated. And at night, you just make sure that you seal everything in the container because it's cooler at night. But during the day, you need to open your doors, make sure that there's enough air coming in and there's enough ventilation, and also having fans inside the tunnel to control the temperature because it gets too hot in the tunnel. Another issue, it's also with the load shedding because we're using water pumps. So I had a challenge with load shedding because if there's load shedding, it affects your plants because the water doesn't circulate. So we had engagements with the University of Johannesburg, the engineering side, to say, can they assist from the engineering side to put in solar panels that can assist us to say, let it run whilst there's no electricity. So they're busy setting up that for us. And it's a partnership that we've entered with the UJ University in the Doornfontein campus.
Yeah. Now, you know, as you're talking, I'm just thinking, wow, you've mentioned high infrastructure costs. But then again, hydroponic is great for our environment, climate control. It just manages or de-risks the factor that typical farmers would face, drought, you know, having to farm on soil and having to think of crop rotational methods. With hydroponic farming, you literally are farming on water, you're recirculating that water, you're saving that water. So, you know, as much as there's positive with hydroponic, there's also like that negative with the high infrastructure costs. What would you say from your experience? I know that you mentioned that, you know, with your entity, you are primarily producing for the preschool within the building, and in addition you send surplus externally. So if a person would want to start farming hydroponically, what would you say, based on your structure, how many tunnels or how many structures would one need to be a commercially viable entity? If they had to farm spinach today and they get maybe an order of 1,000 bunches a day, you know, what would you advise someone to, how many tunnels would one need to start off with?
I think even on the 3 tunnels, you can still do it because you're looking at 3,000 crops, 3,600 or more crops. It's
Okay.
just that with that, you just have to make sure you've got an offtake, because the challenge will be you be growing and you're keeping a lot of stock. So I always advise people to say, before you even think of planting, have an offtake agreement, because in our case, we had an offtake with Food Lovers to do their different lettuces, of variety of lettuces. So the excess that we have, we always donate. And then the spinach, because we know it's used regularly, we grow it for the social side to donate to the crèche and to the children's home. So I always advise new entrants to say, secure an offtake before you even think of planting, because it saves you the hassle of saying, I've grown this, but where do I take it to the market? Because if you're dealing with the Joburg market, the prices are controlled and you end up having a challenge. But if you've got an offtake agreement, you have agreed on the price, you know who you're growing for, and you can estimate how much is coming in.
Okay, so what you're saying is that, just to reiterate, with the 3 tunnels that you currently have, for example, which is giving about 3,600 plants, that is quite viable for one to start off with, provided that they have an offtake, because they will be producing quite a lot of products. And the last thing that that farmer would want is to have products on hand without having a buyer that could just basically buy out all the crops. So from planting that seed or seedling to harvesting within that specific tunnel or infrastructure, how many days are we looking at?
You're looking at 20 days.
Okay.
You're looking at 20 days. So you can plan your whole month. And if you've got an offtake, because most of the buyers, they're looking at consistency. Are you able to give them what they need at the time they need it? So that's why I would really, really say, before you start, secure an offtake.
Awesome. Sibongile, we have a question here from Solomon Zulu. He says, hi there, I'm interested in hydroponics farming. On average, can you give me a figure of how much does one need to invest for about 2 to 3 tunnels in growing the vegetables like peppers, tomatoes, and leafy vegetables? This is a question from Solomon Zulu from YouTube.
Okay, thank you, Solomon, for the question. I think with Solomon, because it will depend on the system that he wants to use, because I know with the peppers, you will need to invest also on bigger containers, and also the trellising, which is an additional cost. So if he can more or less save about 150,000 for a total setup of 3 tunnels, then he's able to actually invest that money into the whole production system.
So let's go, in part of his question, he also says leafy veg, peppers, tomatoes, and leafy vegetables. Was the 20 days estimate pertaining the leafy vegetables? So if one wanted to plant spinach or kale or lettuce, it would take 20 days from planting to harvest?
Yes.
All right, awesome. And how are you dealing with security of your infrastructure? I mean, we spoke about they come quite, there are high or expensive structures to invest in. So would one need to ensure the infrastructure, have an on-site security every day? How are you dealing with security on your farm?
Yeah, with security, because with us, we were fortunate because we are sitting at an outreach center where there's a security guy that works 24/7. And then there's also, we put in an electric fence around the farm. So we could secure the farm with electric fence. So if it's in a remote place where you think it might not be secure, I would always advise people to say, have someone who can guard for you the place. Yes.
One thing I just thought about now is that I know your Mcebo group, your hydroponic farm is situated in the city on a rooftop. But I think it's important to also note that these 3 tunnels or infrastructure that you've mentioned can also be built on land. So,
Yes,
for example,
yes,
if someone has 2 hectares or 3 hectares back at
yes.
home, or in their yard or in their garden, they can still invest in that. Is that correct? But maybe instead of
Yes.
using municipal water, borehole
They use
water, or
borehole.
whatever the case is.
And they can also do rainwater harvesting.
Explain
Because
to us.
rainwater, yeah, they can also use rainwater harvesting just to save on the costs. And with the structure, it can be set up on a flat surface, and it's not a challenge because it works. It's just that it's a system that is set up. With the roof, the roof has to be flat. If you've got a house with a flat roof, you can maximize that space
Yes.
to put in a tunnel and plant from there. Especially guys with restaurants.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And is it easy to secure lease agreements with building owners? This is a private property podcast. I mean, and a lot of people here, are interested in property, and it maybe there could be property experts and investors looking and listening to our conversation. But is it easy to approach landlords and ask them to rent their roof?
Yes, I find that they're actually very interested and very excited for the fact that they can maximize that space that has been lying fallow to bring in something that can actually benefit them. And it also helps with greening your building, because now you bringing in a farm on top of your building. So you actually greening your building. So most of the property owners are like keen, and they're like, if we can save space, especially with a high rate of migration into the inner city, you maximize that space. And I've seen it in Israel. When I went to Israel, I saw that most of them, they're growing their vegetables on their properties, on the roofs. So if we can move as a nation to actually maximize the space, you look at the inner city, there's so many buildings. Yeah. And some of the buildings are empty, some are just being vandalized. If we can go back and rebuild and have warehouses where we are manufacturing food, because the rate of migration is going to cause us a problem of shortage of food. So food should be available. With the COVID-19, we experienced a shortage of lots of vegetables. At the Joburg market, they was calling for vegetables, and there was a serious shortage. Because now everyone is at home, everyone is cooking, and there wasn't enough food.
Yeah.
So it was a wake-up call.
Yeah, and I'm sure you were smiling all the way when there was lockdown, because nobody could travel, so therefore less carbon emissions from the vehicles.
I'm telling you, it was a pleasure to be in the inner city. I really enjoyed the city. It was a clean city and quiet city.
That is fantastic. But I think even in what you were saying is that what I took from that, in terms of you saying that there's an opportunity for one to take advantage of with all these rooftop buildings lying fallow. And I think that's also another way to eliminate a major problem that most farmers face, which is access to market. And the reason why they lack access to market, for some of them, they say from post-harvesting to get the product from the farm to the client, there's definitely like high logistical costs. So if I think about it and think about all these restaurants that are in the city, if you're farming on the roof, it's a matter of harvesting and going down, maybe walking or jumping to a robot or two, and your product is already at your favorite restaurant. So I think from that element, what you're doing, it's also just solving that problem with access to market. Is that what you've also experienced as well?
Yes, and it's so true, because it also helps with shortening the food mile. Because if you look at our food mile, it travels a lot before it gets to the end user. So we're looking at saying it should be from farm to fork, where someone can actually come in, buy a lettuce and have it. And especially people who are staying in the inner city. I get ladies that are staying in Madula Moho, which is just opposite the farm. They just come in and buy their vegetables, and then they go and cook, when they would have traveled to look for a supermarket and start paying more as well. You see, so it shortens the food mile, and it gives people access to food as and when they want it.
Yeah, there's just an update, a follow-up question again, once from Solomon. It's just, he wanted for you to just please clarify that this infrastructure that you mentioned, is it a 10 by 30 tunnel? And in average for the 3 structures, he should look at about 150,000 for the entire setup.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
Before I let you go, Sibongile, I just want to know the good stuff. What opportunities have you been able to take advantage of as being a hydroponic rooftop farmer? And what is the future looking like for Mcebo Group?
You know, you'll be surprised that we actually ended up having joint initiatives with the tourist groups within the city. So revenue stream was not only limited to vegetables. We ended up having revenue that comes from tourism, where people come in to tour the farm and say, this is something new that we haven't seen before. We want to come in there. And also working with fellow entrepreneurs who have their own products, who are doing like your honey and all that. So on market days, we'll set up market days on the rooftop and tourists come in and buy. And it opens that whole engagement of having revenue coming in and people actually selling their produce on market days. So it has opened up new opportunities.
This is amazing. So where can one find this information? Is it on a Facebook group?
It's Job at Places on Facebook. If you go to Job at Places on Facebook, we've partnered with them. So they do tours of the city. Then they also have people coming to tour the farm.
Okay, so they have to go through the city tours, not to say, I want to speak to Sibongile directly. I want to view your farm with my family of 10, for example, you know, extended family included, just for that tour.
Yeah, we entered into a partnership to say, let it not be limited to them just coming to the farm. So they start at the Gandhi Square and then they move up with the bus until they get to the farm. So it becomes a full tour of the city, and then you also look at coming to the farm with your family as well. And then we're also doing trainings for youth to come and learn about the new way of farming, especially the youth that doesn't want to touch soil. But I always say to them, you need to touch soil. Soil is living. Because they don't want to be dirty. With the hydroponics farm, you can come wearing your suit and still farm. It's so smart. It's so smart. It's so smart.
Wow.
But I enjoy the traditional organic way of farming. So my kids are the ones that are always, Mom, thank you for allowing us to be part of this. So whenever there's planting days and harvest time, they come in and they have, to them, it's a picnic. It's a picnic. They really have fun because they don't want to be dirty. They come in their jeans and they are all stars and they're working and they go back home. They're not dirty because the coconut doesn't make them dirty.
Wow, stylish farming, eh?
Yeah, smart farming. It's for them. But with us, we want the traditional way where we can touch the soil and get dirty on the soil.
Wow, thank you so much, Sibongile, for sharing your insights. It was, I definitely learned a great deal. Thank you to everybody that has sent questions. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. But yeah, we will include Sibongile's details and website address in the show notes after the podcast. And be sure to catch the live recording on Private Properties social media channels, Facebook, as well as on YouTube, which will be posted post this conversation of ours. But I hope you learned a great deal as much as I have. I'm not a hydroponic farmer, but definitely I think the way Sibongile positioned herself and her farm, and the fact that we can farm in suits and our high heels or in our all-stars, that is fantastic. Sibongile, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, my dear, and have a blessed day. And thank you for us sharing this information. We're in an information age and the youth needs to hear about this and be attracted back to farming, because most of them have said farming is for old people. So with smart farming, we're actually encouraging them to say, come and do it. Help us to grow our communities.
Wow, absolutely. I totally agree with you. Well, that's it from myself and Sibongile. Please catch us once again with another guest on Thursday, 1 o'clock, same place. Thank you very much.
Thank you.